All right. Thank you very much. My name is Robert Keahey. As mentioned, I'm a member of the Sunnyvale Heritage Park Museum. If I had known there was chocolate involved, I would have volunteered a lot earlier to come speak with you. So thank you very much for inviting me today. So we're going to talk about way back, not as far back as the United States Navy, but we're going to go back into the 1840s and talk about the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party of 1844. Who's heard of the Donner Party? I would be surprised if there was a hand that did not go up in this room. Guess what? There were pioneers before the Donner Party. Bidwell Bartleson in 1841. We had the Giles Walker in 1843. We had the Whitmans and the Spaldings going to Oregon in the mid-1830s, followed by the Ells and the Smiths and others. So they weren't the first that made the trek, but they were pretty unique in what they did. So the party was named after three gentlemen. Elijah Stephens, he was an old fur trapper, mountaineer. He was a pretty crusty old guy. He was an Indian agent. He was a government blacksmith. And he was designated as the leader of the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party. The second member was Dr. John Townsend. He was a licensed physician from Philadelphia. And he decided that there was a better life out west. And the third member of the party was Martin Murphy Sr., a devout Irish Catholic, born in 1785, actually participated in the Irish Revolution at the age of 13. And in 1820, he left because of the British Protestant prosecution. So why did they leave Missouri at the time in 1844? Well, first of all, religious freedom. While they had it compared to where they were in Canada and Ireland, they were still looking for, the ability to freely practice their religion. The second was the promise of free land. Mexico had millions of acres in the Southwest. And the escape from disease, because if you lived along the Missouri and Mississippi River in the early 1840s, malaria was a problem. And in fact, Martin Murphy Sr. would lose his beloved wife, Mary Foley. Martin Murphy Jr. would lose yet another baby girl. They lost two in Canada to malaria. So they made the decision to go west. So where did they go? Well, they left the Nishnawotna River on May 15th, 1844, crossed the Missouri River and headed out across this thing called the Oregon Trail. They made it to Fort Laramie where they would restock, and then they would go up through the Rockies over to Fort Hall and then down the Humboldt River, across the Sierra Nevada, and into Sutter's Fort. And that was the destination. Sutter's Fort had been established in 1842, and if you were going to California, which there weren't that many people going at that time, you did at least know where that was. So that journey was about 2,000 miles. That doesn't maybe look like 2,000 miles, but you followed the rivers, and the rivers are very windy. A gentleman by the name of Keith Melnall, who wrote a very amazing book called The Hard Road West, figured out, based on an 1840s person, that was about 4.1 million steps. And I say steps because if you were a woman, especially, or a child, you didn't ride in that wagon that's on the table there. You walked. Another historian by the name of John Unruh figured that in the mid-1840s, it took on average of about 152 days to make that journey. So how many of you in here have an Apple Watch on? Few? Do you count your steps? Yes. My wife is passionate about that every day. I mean, if at 10 o'clock at night she hadn't gotten her 10,000 steps, she's walking around the house, up and down the hall. But if you were a pioneer woman on the trail in 1844, you had to walk 26,973 steps every day for 152 days in the desert, in the rain, in the snow, across the mountains, crossing rivers, and either, if you were lucky, in the summer a gingham dress, or in the winter a wool dress, which was wet for most of the time, And if you were really lucky, about every 6 weeks, you got to take a bath in a cold stream. So that was your life on the trail. So in 1844, there were two major sectors that left. They were called the Northsiders, which were the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy and the Thorpe Party, which actually joined together early on. And then at the bottom, you see the others headed to Oregon. And if you see the numbers, out of the 1,528 people that made the trek, only 52 went to California, which was the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party. So let's take a quick trip with them. We'll try to make this fairly quick. They leave on May 15th, 1844, and the first thing they do is get in a fight. There were 29 Irish Catholics in the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party, and guess what? The Thorpe Party was Protestants, Baptists. They did not get along at all, and the Thorpe Party did not like Elijah Stephens. In fact, A.C.R. Shaw fired a gun at him and threatened to kill him. So about halfway to Fort Laramie, they split. Most of the party, the Thorpe Party, split. Some of them went on for a while with the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy, but it was a rough start. And then the rains came. 1844 was one of the wettest years on record. In fact, the outflow of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers is the greatest that has ever been recorded in 1844. And it rained 52 of the first 60 days on the trail. And you were wet constantly. So they get to the Rockies, and they get to a place called Independence Rock. This is a rock that sticks up out of the ground. The fur trappers would carve their names in it. And guess what? On July 4th, 1844, we have a birth. James and Mary Miller give birth to a baby girl, and they name her Ellen Independence Miller in honor of her birth. So now we have 51 people. So they get to what's called the Little Colorado Desert in the Green Valley, Green River Valley, and they have a decision to make. They could take that dotted line down to Fort Bridger and maybe get some supplies, but they decided to take what's known today as the Sublet Cutoff, and it was actually recommended by Caleb Greenwood and Isaac Hitchcock, and it was going to save them 3 to 4 days. They thought it was about 25 miles, ended up being about 50 without water. So it was a very rough journey across there. But they make it, they go to Fort Hall, they reprovision, and then they head down the Humboldt River. So if you look at that area where that skull is, that's the Great Basin of the United States. It's about 220,000 square miles of some of the harshest land you will ever see. The river itself is very alkaline, and it's hot and dry, and it's messy. It's about 650 miles, but they make it. And then they get to the 40-mile desert, the Humboldt Sink at the end of that, and the river just disappears. Now, believe it or not, they had 3 guides with them: Elijah Stephens, Isaac Hitchcock, and Caleb Greenwood. Old because he was 81 years old at the time. So he was not a spring chicken by any means. But they didn't know where to go. Isaac Hitchcock had actually been to California in 1833, but not by that particular route. So they didn't know where to go. They met an old Paiute chief, and he would become nicknamed Truckee, because he used a Paiute word, troquet, over and over, and they interpreted that as Truckee. So if you're familiar with the Truckee River and Truckee, California, that's how it got its name. And he told them about this great river that you could go, if you crossed the desert, and it would take you into the mountains, and then you could go over the great mountains. You may have seen a picture of Truckee. If you've ever Googled, if you're from a history buff or anything, you may have seen a picture of Truckee. That's not Truckee. We do not have a picture of Truckee. Those are misrepresentations, or it may be one of his descendants. So what we did as part of History Expeditions is we worked with Native American councils, and we got what were defined as the proper attire and headdress for that period of a Paiute chief. And we took all the pictures of his descendants that we could find, and we ran it through an AI engine called Perplexity, and I present you what we think Chief Truckee looked like. So that's the official picture we're going to use moving forward. We label it as a likeness, but we do believe that's what Truckee would have looked like. So now they get to the top of the mountains, the Sierra Nevada at Donner Lake, and they have 3 decisions to make. The first is they split the party. They send 6 young people off on horseback to head out to Sutter's Fort. 3 of the Murphys, Ellen, she was about 22, John and Dan were about 17 and 18, Elizabeth Townsend, Dr. Townsend's wife, was 37, and then we had her servant and a drover named Oliver Magnet. And they headed out on horseback, and that's the trek that the History Expeditions team just recreated last week. So they made it to Sutter's Fort. They decided that they would consolidate their 11 wagons down to 5 because the oxen were basically worn out from going up the river for a month in the cold, icy water of the Truckee River. And on November 25th, 1844, they literally pulled those 5 wagons over the Sierra Nevada in about 2 feet of snow over a granite wall. The significance of that is they are the first pioneers to bring wagons into California. And then the third decision they made was they would leave a young 17-year-old boy by the name of Moses Schallenberger with the wagons at Donner Lake, the 6 remaining wagons that they left behind. Actually, 2 other men volunteered to stay with him, but after about 10 feet of snow, they bailed on him. And they left the 17-year-old boy in this crudely built cabin that the brains of the Donner Party would use 2 years later. So now we have the 5 wagons. They move on down about 15 miles to a place called Big Bend on the Yuba River, and they decide to camp there. And on December 1st, 1844, Mary Bolger Murphy gives birth to a baby girl named Elizabeth Yuba Murphy. So far we've had 2 women give birth on the trail. So all that thing I described to you about walking and all that good stuff, do it pregnant also. So it's not fun. So now we have 22 people left at the camp, and 21 of the party decide to head down to Sutter's Fort, get some supplies, and come back up, thinking, a week, 2 weeks maybe, we can get out there at Sutter's Fort, negotiate some supplies, come back, get our families, and head out. That doesn't happen. These people at the winter encampment on Big Bend and Moses Schallenberger spend almost 3 full months in the Sierra Nevada in the wintertime with crudely built shelters and limited supplies. Moses Schallenberger would trap foxes and eat them by himself. The women at the winter encampment would end up boiling leather off their shoes, off the cowhides on the roofs. So why is that? Well, when the men got to Sutter's Fort, guess what? There was a revolt going on in Alta California. The then governor, Manuel Micheltorena, was trying to be deposed by the previous governor, Juan Bautista Alvarado. Mr. Sutter of Sutter's Fort, by whatever means, conscripted those men into that army, and for the next 2 months almost, they roam around California trying to chase down Alvarado. At the end of January, they convince Alvarado that they need to go back and rescue their families. So at the end of January, they head back into the Sierra Nevada. A young man by the name of Dennis Martin leads the charge. He's the head of them. He goes into the Sierra Nevada. He finds the men and women at the winter encampment. They're alive. They're hungry. If they are alive, he goes over the Sierra Nevada, down to Donner Lake, and guess who he finds? Young Moses Schallenberger, 10 feet plus of snow, who's been there 3 months by himself. So now we've rescued all 22 members of the winter encampment and Moses Schallenberger at his cabin. And then finally, on around the first week of March, 1845, almost a year after they left, the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party is reunited at Sutter's Fort. 50 left, 52 made it to Sutter's Fort, but we're not through. A week after they got there, Ann Martin Murphy, James Murphy's wife, gives birth to a baby boy, Martin D. Murphy. So now we have 53. We had 3 women pregnant for this whole journey across the western deserts. So what was significant about this? Well, many things. They were first to use experienced guides, 3 of them. They took the sublet cut off, which was a first. That opened that trail for the following pioneers. They were the first to bring wagons across that 40-mile desert. The 2 previous parties had abandoned their wagons, one near Salt Lake, one at the eastern side of the Sierra near Owens Lake. They were the first to build a permanent structure. I put permanent in quotes. They were first to find a wagon passage over the Sierras, which would become the major thoroughfare for hundreds of thousands of other pioneers to follow. They brought wagons into California. They survived a winter in California, or in the Sierras, and they actually went back over the next spring to retrieve their wagons. Unfortunately, the wagons had been emptied. And they arrived with all 50 members plus 2. Pretty amazing story. So the legacy they left was amazing. We've calculated that there's probably somewhere between 700 and 1,000 descendants from that party that have made a major impact on California, not only from a historical perspective, but an economical perspective, in the billions and billions of dollars. So let's talk about the Murphys, because Stephens-Townsend-Murphy, Sunnyvale Heritage Park Museum, that's what we're all about. So we'll go briefly through some of the family members. Good old Martin Murphy Sr. settled near Gilroy, and he founded what we now know as San Martin today. He established, and I cannot ever do this, Rancho Ojo Agua de la Coche, a rancho there. He actually built a very beautiful redwood house after living in an adobe house for several years. He was actually a justice of the peace of the Burnett Township. He created a chapel along the stagecoach route from San Jose to Monterey. And he was known for his Irish hospitality. He loved people. 2 of the older boys, Dan and John, if you're familiar with the little place up in the Sierras called Murphy's, 1848, they go up there and they establish a little mining camp. And John, in particular, made a fortune in gold mining. Dan, not so much, but John would actually marry a Native American woman by the name of Pocala. And then in 1849, he actually left there and would come back down to the San Jose area. And then Dan would make an absolute fortune owning land. At one point, he was the largest landholder in the United States, and he owned a 4 million acre rancho in Mexico at one point. And he was known as the cattle king of Nevada and the cattle king of Idaho at one point. So kind of an interesting story about old John. So that young lady on the right is Virginia Elizabeth Beckenstowe Reed. I started with the Donner Party. She was the young 12-year-old girl who wrote to her sister, or her cousin after she got to California, telling the tale of what happened to him. And she said, the famous line, "Hurry along and don't take no cut-offs."
Patty Reed?
Huh?
Patty Reed?
No, Virginia. Virginia Elizabeth was the one that wrote the letter and said that. So, John Murphy, who was about 26 in 1850, takes a liking to this young, now she's about 16 years old now, a young lady by the name of Virginia Reed, and they fall in love, and they want to get married. But her stepfather, James Fraser Reed, and if you've ever read anything about the Donner Party, and you know James Fraser Reed, he was a pretty rough and ready guy. And he said, basically, if you don't leave my daughter alone, I'm going to kill you. And he meant it. So they run off and get married. They elope for the time. Something you probably didn't think about much in that period of time. Well, guess what? Martin Murphy Sr., devout Irish Catholic, finds out about it, and he is livid. They did not get married in the Catholic Church. So he makes them get married again. So they're really married by this time. And about a year later, they have their first child, Mary. And as you know how grandkids tend to do, they kind of smooth things over. And they go on to have 9 children together. Bernard, one of the older sons, unfortunately was killed in the Jenny Lind explosion in 1853, along with his nephew, Thomas Kell, one of his older sister's sons. James, you remember Ann Martin Murphy gave birth as soon as they reached Sutter Fork. He would establish a very successful lumber business and build the Leesthorpe Pier in San Francisco. They built a beautiful farm called Ringwood Farm. If you ever see a picture of this, it's just amazing. And he's planted some of the first orchards in Santa Clara Valley, including the first olive orchard. Mary Murphy Miller, remember? Ellen Independence Miller on the trail, July 4th. She and her husband, James, settled in San Rafael. They owned about 8,000 acres there, and they established a very successful cattle, horse, sheep farming business there, really built that community up. Ellen Murphy at the time, she changed her name later in life. She was one of the members of the party, Horseback Party of 6. At 22 years of age, rode across the Sierra, not knowing where to go. She married Charles Weber from the Bidwell-Barneson Party of 1841. They founded Stockton, sold supplies to the gold mines. He actually established the first mail service via ship on the Sacramento River down to San Francisco. And they donated significant amounts of land for community development. But by far, the most impactful of the Martin Murphy Sr. family members was Martin Jr. and his wife, Mary Bolger Murphy. In 1845, they bought a rancho of about 2 square leagues. It was called the Ernesto from Rufus Ernest. And they paid $250 for it. In 1849, he sold half of that for $50,000. And he would move down and buy from Mariana Castro, or Castro Street, about 4,300 acres for $12,500, and he would establish Rancho Pastoria de las Borgas, or sheep pasture. And they would be very successful in raising sheep, cattle, wheat, and they owned hundreds of thousands of acres, land all the way from here to San Luis Obispo at one point. They built the first wood frame house in Santa Clara Valley. I say built, they actually shipped plans to Maine, had the house built in Maine, disassembled, put on a boat, sent all the way around South America, to the Bay of San Francisco, put on a wagon, brought to what is now Murphy Park in Sunnyvale, and reassembled. First house. They provided money, land, and political influence to establish the Santa Clara College or School for Boys, which is now Santa Clara University. They also worked with the Sisters of Notre Dame d'Amour to establish the Notre Dame School for Girls, which is now Notre Dame d'Amour. And they built the first brick buildings in San Jose. They gave the right-of-way for the Southern Pacific Railroad, so now that we have Caltrain over here going south. And in 1881, they had their golden wedding anniversary, and they invited the entire Santa Clara and San Mateo counties, all the way from San Francisco all the way down through Monterey. And they had an estimated 5,000 to 7,000 people show up for a 3-day event. And this is the house they built. It had stood until 1961. Unfortunately, it was torn down to make room for Central Expressway. It was a historic landmark, but City Council decided that didn't really matter. As far as their children, Elizabeth Yuba Murphy, the reason she got her name Yuba is in February of 1845 when they were coming out of the mountains. She was in a little cradle on the back of a horse that fell off into the Yuba River and started floating away. Martin Murphy Jr. jumps in, grabs her, and he christens her right there in the middle of the Yuba River. In February 1845, he says, "I christened the Yuba." They received about 3,300 acres as a wedding gift when she married William Tate, a dry goods merchant, which is now just a little town up the road called Los Altos. Unfortunately, he died very young, at around 31. Or he died in 1869. She died around at the age of 31. And then Martin Murphy and Mary Bolger would raise their 4 children. In addition, there were 4 members of the party, the Sullivans, who were a little bit older, but their parents had died, and basically Martin and Mary Bolger raised them, in effect. Patrick was a major landowner down in San Luis Obispo. He managed about 73,000 acres down there. As you'll see, the Murphys were very involved in politics. He was a 3-time state senator, state assemblyman. He was a director of a bank in San Luis Obispo. They were also very heavy into the financial industry, and he granted the right-of-way for the Southern Pacific Railway going through San Luis Obispo. Bernard was state assemblyman, state senator, mayor of San Jose 3 times. He gave lots of money to establish the San Jose Free Public Library. If you're wondering why the Lick Observatory resides up on top of Mount Hamilton, he worked to get the right-of-way to actually build that observatory for James Lick. He was the president of the Commercial Savings Bank, and when there was a financial run on the banks in 1892, he actually used his own money to make his depositors whole. And he sold his house in San Jose and used that money to make his depositors whole. So, what happened to this Murphy family? Well, 1850, California becomes a state, right? Guess what else in 1850?
Taxes.
Property taxes. And they did it not only at the county level, but they did it at the state level, the county level, and the municipal level. So when you own hundreds of thousands of acres of land, and most of it is not producing revenue, you got a problem. So they started divvying up the land over the years and giving it to their heirs and so on. When Mary Bolger Murphy died in 1892, the estate was estimated at about $5.2 million. So it was if you roll that forward to $20-25, it was still a very significant estate. But one of the people that bought some of that land was a gentleman by the name of Walter Crossman. He was a marketing and real estate developer, and he bought 250 acres, what is now downtown Sunnyvale. And in 1897, he laid out a plan that he wanted to call the town of Murphy. Unfortunately, the postmaster said, nope, Murphy's is already taken. He wanted Encina, Ensenada, Ensenal, those were all taken. Somehow they ended up in 1901 assigning the name of Sunnyvale. And he believed that this was what he called a city of destiny. He thought this was going to be a great place to live. But he really didn't have a plan until 1906, the great San Francisco earthquake occurs. 2/3 of the city is destroyed. He gets on his horse, he rides up to San Francisco, and he starts talking to businesses up there. And he says, basically, we got great land down there, the sun shines all the time, it's warm, and our ground doesn't shake. We know that's not true. But he brought many companies down, including the canneries, which were Libby McNeil. Libby was the major one, and Shuckle. And then the Hindi Iron Works and the Jubilee Incubators. Those were the genesis of what we know as Sunnyvale today. And if you look at this list of companies that goes on and on and on, he basically established the groundwork for that to occur. And as a result, what at one point was just some grassland and farmland sitting out here in the middle of Santa Clara Valley is now the technology capital of the world. So, please come by and visit at the Sunnyvale Heritage Park Museum, and we'll give you the full story. You got the Reader's Digest today. And we do have an event coming up on October 25th called Trails to Rails. And this is our first community-wide event. It's going to be a major event. We're going to have all kind of booths and fun stuff for kids to do. We're going to have a full-size covered wagon there. We're going to have Oregon California Trails Association is going to be there. History Expeditions, who just completed the trek over the Sierra Nevada, is going to be there. We're going to have Caleb O. Greenwood. Francis Xavier Mullen portrays this crusty old mountain guy in full buckskin outfit, and he does a great presentation of him. So I definitely want to encourage you to come out, and thank you very much for your time.
That was great.
Oh,
Really
thank you.
enjoyed it.
Question?
Yeah, thanks. This looks like the house that they had before. Did you reconstruct the house, or when the highway went through or whatever, did they take it down and put it back up again?
The house was completely destroyed, and the museum is a replica that was opened in 2008. So the front basically looks pretty much like the house did, except on ours, the porch sticks out for ADA purposes, but on the original house, the porch was recessed into the house, and they added 2 wings onto the back of the original house. Unfortunately, it was torn down. Oh, is it okay to take questions? Yes.
I just want to say, this was, I especially enjoyed this because I grew up in Sunnyvale. I went to Sunnyvale High School. My high school boyfriend worked at the Living Cannery.
Oh.
We had our 40th high school reunion on Murphy Street at the Del Monte building, which is no longer part of that. And I have a really good friend who lives in Murphy's, and I didn't know that came from Murphy Party, Cody.
Yeah.
So this just brings everything back home, and I posted an event that year.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, if you go to Murphy's and you go by the creek down on Main Street, you look over a little wall there, there's a little monument that talks about Dan and John camping near there in 1848.
My parents used to live in Arnold, so we've been to Murphy many times.
Well, Murphy's is I was there last week. It's a great place. Yes, ma'am.
Why did they skip going to Fort Bridger?
To save time. Because it would have
Because
added.
that's kind of more direct.
Well, but it's the little Colorado desert, so it's very rough. But typically you would go down to Fort Bridger, try to get some supplies.
Right.
But that was very iffy. And if you're familiar with the Hastings cutoff story, which I can talk about offline.
No, but have you been to Fort Bridger?
Huh?
I've been to Fort
Okay.
Bridger, so I
Well,
I know.
it wasn't noted for having lots of supplies.
Well, yeah, because it was military driven, and there was more.
Later on, it was military driven. I mean, it was built 3 times before we actually settled on the last location. So, yeah, that's why they decided to take the cutoff, just to save time. Yes?
Do you know what happened to Moses Schellenberg? I think he's buried at the cemetery, but I don't know what happened to him.
So he actually worked with the Navy doing supply logistics for a while. He planted orchards here. He lived until 1909 here in San Jose. Schallenberger School. There's a Schallenberger Ridge up in the Sierra Nevada. In 1884, he actually dictated what he called his reminiscence to his daughter, who had a PhD, and she recorded it, and that's the only record of this party. Townsend supposedly had a diary, but it was lost or stolen before he and Elizabeth died in 1850. Schallenberger School here, is named after Moses. He actually adopted Dr. Townsend and Elizabeth's young son after they died of treating cholera, and then married and had a family of his own.
I just got 17-year-old out in the snow for 3 months alone, so.
I mean, he trapped foxes. He actually ate a crow. I've heard the expression "eating crow." He said he would not do that again. He would probably starve. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about, the animals that they took. Did they begin with the oxen, or did they pick up the oxen right before the desert?
They actually started with the oxen. So they had oxen, and they were also driving cattle. So I mentioned the rough start that they had. When they got to the Missouri River, the Thorpe party was dead set against having a leader, and that's what really gave them a rocky start. Stephens was hard-nosed and was pushing them like crazy because he knew, if you didn't go fast, this was going to be a disaster. He wanted to cross the Missouri River while it was still flooded, and the Thorpe party didn't, but they went ahead and started anyway. A lot of the oxen got stuck in the mud, and they just had to leave them. They just had to leave them. They had to go back, wait till the river receded, and then they were able to cross after that. But the real issue was when they got to the Truckee River, they didn't know any route into the Sierras except up the river. So they spent 30 days going up that river. And when I say up the river, I mean in the river. And that softened the hooves of the oxen. A lot of them were lost. Some were killed by Native Americans. I mean, so when they got to the summit, they only had enough oxen left to effectively pull 5 wagons. And Dr. Townsend's wagon was left, and he estimated at that time, all his surgical, medical equipment, books, and everything, he put a value of about $8,000 on that. If you roll that forward today, it's probably $300,000 worth of stuff that he lost.
And they got horses as well, right?
They had horses, yes. In fact, they acquired some horses on the trail. Elizabeth Townsend had a horse that was known for its ability to cross rivers. When they went up the Truckee River, there were days that they were crossing the river as many as 10 times. So it was brutal. Any other questions?
Just one more. That crusty old dude that looks like my great-grandpa.
Elijah Stephens?
Yeah. Did you say previously that Stevens Creek's named after him?
So his name was Stephens.
Right.
Whenever they came up with Stevens Creek and Stevens Creek Boulevard, they misspelled it.
But it is after him.
It is after him. He actually moved to Kern County, down around Bakersfield, ended up raising chickens and bees, and he was bitter his whole life on the fact that they didn't give him credit for the summit. They named it Donner Pass instead of Stevens Pass. But in 1994, they named a mountain Mount Stevens for him in the Sierras. Any other questions? I will be around here if you do have questions. I apologize for going over.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.